Well, this is a very unusual day today because we are talking to a gentleman who has been there and done that on so many occasions at so many different racetracks around Australia and overseas. John Smith, not exactly an uncommon name, but a very uncommon racing driver. John, welcome to the AMC podcast series. It's really nice to have you. I'm going to ask you the first question, which is the normal first question. How the devil did you get started in motor racing?
Thanks, Ray. It's good to be here. I was the son of a car dealer, and of course, being around cars all my life, as long as I can remember. I can remember back when I was 8 years old that I could drive a car, and we lived at Woolooware, and back those days it was pretty quiet with a dirt road. And the first car I ever really drove seriously was a 1926 Clino, which was given to the Boy Scouts, and my father happened to be treasurer of the Boy Scouts, and it was given there by an old guy that just said, I'll give it to you, sell it and contribute the money. Well, I happened to be very slow at selling the car, so I drove it around when I was 8 years old for about 6 months, just up and down Ambine Street at Woolooware with all my friends hanging out of it.
You can just imagine the local highway patrol of today.
Oh, yeah.
That would go down really well, wouldn't it?
Well, just a quick one on that. I went a little bit further than I should have one day, and the thing, anyway, didn't have a fan. Didn't have a fan and a fan belt, so it wouldn't go very far before it boiled. And so my parents knew that it wasn't too far away. But anyway, I got pulled over by this guy, and he saw me driving it up the road. Of course, unregistered, uninsured, 8-year-old driving it, the whole thing. And he's run out on the road and stopped me, and he said, "What are you doing? What's going on? You shouldn't be driving it." And I just said, "Oh, well, I'm just having a bit of fun anyway." He said, "Get over, I'll drive it." Well, he's got in the thing, and the gear change was out on the running boards. The accelerator pedal was in a little pedal in between the clutch and the brake, and the steering wheel is one of those 4-piece spliced together things that come apart in your hand. So he had no idea what to do with it. So he said, "All right, you drive it back to here and I'm going to speak to your parents." So he drove me back. I drove him back to a place which is only about 300 metres away. And he goes in and knocked on the door, saw my mother, and he said, "Your little boy's been driving this car up the road. I thought I'd tell you so you can do something about it, blah, 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 blah." And you see the steam coming out of his ears. And my mother's turned around to me and he said, in front of the guy, and she says, "You're a naughty little boy, and wait till your father comes home. He's really going to get angry with you." And the guy was very satisfied, then just left. And when he's left, my mother turned around and said, "Listen, you better not quite go so far up the road anymore."
Yes, as I said, that was, let's call it earlier days. Earlier days, long before they invented the highway patrol.
Yeah.
So you get back to the original question.
Yes.
You were driving motor cars at 8 years of age.
Yes.
You couldn't actually go motor racing at 8 years of age unless, of course, it was in karts. Did you start in karts or did you just go straight onto circuit racing?
The long story is my father was totally against motor racing. He didn't want to see me get hurt. So he wouldn't let me do anything at all until, I was old enough to make my own decisions, which was at 21. So I couldn't do it. But when I turned 21, first of all, I had a little Austin A30 panel van, and which I've still got, mind you. Anyway, and I had a V8 Valiant, AP6 V8, and I joined Eastern Suburbs Sporting Car Club.
Eastern Suburbs, that's a long way from Woolooware.
Oh, yeah. A lot of friends of mine were members of that club, and it was a great club. And a strong hill climb club, and so I went in all the routine club events with the Valiant, but it was far from competitive. So shortly, or probably a year later after competing with the Valiant, then I bought a Mini Cooper S in 1970, I think it was. So I competed in 71, 72, and then end of 73, I bought a Formula V.
And that's where it went downhill from there, is that right?
Yeah.
So,
I enjoyed Formula Vs. That was ex-Peter Finlay car at one stage.
okay. So that was 74.
74.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was my first race at Emery Park.
Now, you switched over, you drove that for about a year, then you switched to Formula Ford?
No, I drove it for a year, then I bought a Renmax in 75 and competed in the Renmax in 75, and in 76 I bought the Formula Ford.
And you were, which is amazing when you sort of look back on it now, you were second in the Driver to Europe series in the Formula Ford, first year out, and you won the championship the following year.
Yeah.
Now, you got yourself into the Grace Brothers team, which was one of the best teams around at that time, one of the best New South Wales-based teams.
Yeah.
Was that simultaneously very, very good and not so good?
It was good. Hans Tieperman, I found a very straight shooter. They rang me up and said, would I go and have a chat to him? And at that stage, I was sponsored by Kerry Rumball, who was the licensee of the Leppington Inn Hotel, again another member of the Eastern Suburbs Car Club. And as this worked out, Kerry said to me, listen, I can't afford to keep this going this year. For next year, he said, I might have to pull the shutters down and you could be on your own. And the next phone call I got was from Hans Tieperman at Grace Brothers. So when I went and saw him, and we're negotiating along, and I wanted 12 grand and he wanted to pay me 6 or something like that. And I said to him, Mr. Tieperman, it's all very nice, but I already have a sponsor. And I said, he's a good man and he wants to go again, so really, we're going to have to come up with extra money if you really want me. Because I said, really cocky, I said, I'm going to win the championship this year. And I said, if you want to be on the winner, you got to be on me. And the bloke said, well, you're pretty full of yourself. I said, yeah. And he said, all right, how about I give you 8 grand and you can put Leppington in on the car as well. And I said, that'll do just fine.
Well, there's no point in going into negotiations expecting to lose.
That's right.
That's the whole point. You've got to have confidence in yourself.
Yeah.
So that led to the championship. Did you think at that stage of the game to go to Europe, because it was the Driver to Europe scheme?
I did, and I actually went to Europe, but which leads me on to the next year, which was Australian Formula 2 new series. And before I went to Europe, I was going to go to have a holiday and buy some parts to get a racing car to race in the Australian Formula 2 Championship. And before I left, I got a phone call from David Mackay, who said to me, we're looking to run a car in the Formula 2 series at Emery Park next year. And he said, I've got this young guy, Harry Galloway, building a car. And he said, we've had a look around, Graham Watson and myself, and we've looked around, and he said, you're the guy that we want to get to drive the car, but you're going to have to come up with something to join us. And I said, well, I'm just about to head off to the UK, and I said, I've got my money in my hand where I sold the Formula Ford, and I was going to buy a gearbox and engine bits and pieces so I can supply all the running gear. So, and that's how our partnership went. I came back from the UK a few months later armed with a gearbox and a whole pile of stuff from Brian Hart for a little Ford engine, little pushrod. And so it all went together well. In the meantime, I think we ran one race at Emery Park with it, and then Graham Watson was doing some work on John Crisp, who's the boss of Mr. Juicy. And he was talking to him about it, and they said, well, we'll sponsor the car. So it all just fell into place, and that was Harry Galloway's car, and it was a deal to run the Amaroo series because there was no Australian Championship for Formula 2 cars for the next 3 years or 2 years, whatever it was. So, and it was great. Terrific little car, fabulous. And Harry, typical of him, his workmanship was first class.
Yeah. I know you talked to Paul Bernasconi about Harry Galloway. You know, they're still great mates.
That's
after
right.
all these years.
Yeah, and Harry worked for Dave Moore, and I had a really good relationship with Dave Moore after the Formula Ford. You know, Dave was doing all the fabrication work and stuff for me, and we established a good friendship with all the guys at Ford Street, Greenacre.
So the Mr. Juicy car, that wasn't run under the Scuderia Veloci banner though, was it?
No.
No, I thought
no.
not. So you ran
Mr.
one
Juicy
race under Scuds.
Yeah, the first race when it was painted red was under the Scuds, and then
Then the deal changed.
Then the deal changed, and we turned up next time with Mr. Juicy.
In a white car.
In a white car, yeah.
Exactly.
And it was that Amaroo series was terrific. It was a good series.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, there were a lot of series at Amaroo Park. The ARDC did wonderful jobs in that era.
Yeah.
So that then led you on to the 78 Championship. That's where you ran up against John Bowe for the first time.
No, I think 79. John Bowe wasn't there. He was driving a Formula 5000 for Gary Cooper. He just started. The main competitors that year was obviously Brian Sheedon and Sambo and Peter Macro, and the hardest competitor was Peter Lana, who was running a little Elfin with a little Ford in it. And Peter Lana was very, very competitive. It was 5 rounds of the series. I won 3. I lost a wing, came off it one time just through, just trying to, just iron out all the bugs of an unsorted car, just what Harry put together. So the wing fell down at once and a clutch failed, and that was 2 races that I lost.
So when you finished, you won.
Yeah.
That's a reasonably good record.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that led on to when you bought the first Ralt, the RT1?
Yeah, and the RT1, it's a bit of a story as well. David Mackay and Graham Watson owned the car, and he previously raced in New Zealand International Series when Larry Perkins drove it, and he drove it against Kiki Rosberg and all the international guys that went to New Zealand in the Peter Stuyvesant series, the international series. And the car was bought. They bought the car back from New Zealand, and it was at Graham Watson's place, and it was sitting there. And David Mackay, being the agitator that he was sick of Formula 5000 racing, and he wanted to see more competitive stuff. And so he was in the background agitating to run it. So all of a sudden, when the F2 series at Amaroo finished, he turned to the RT1 and said, I want to run this RT1. Mr. Juicy said, yeah, we're still going. So off we went, and I raced it at different places, Lakeside and around the place, just general race meetings, until Bob Jane put on a race down at Calder with David's agitation again, and they brought a whole pile of guys from New Zealand over. We raced against them, and it was like a New Zealand versus Australia race, and there was David McMillan, Steve Millen from New Zealand, Robbie Francevic was over in a car, then there was about 2 other guys. And for Australia there was me, Andrew Medici was running, Peter Lana drove Paul England's Chevron, which was a really nice little car. And then Paul Hamilton had a March and various other cars. And it just a one-off race and everything. And it was really, really good racing. And
so that was late 70s?
Yeah, that was in late 78.
Yeah.
And, it was good racing. That was the first go I'd had with racing with a full-on Formula Pacific Atlantic car.
So, looking at that sort of open-wheeler period of your lifetime, you moved on into the early 80s when the Panasonic series started for Formula Pacific, which was the Formula Atlantic rebadged for Australia.
Pacific,
yeah, exactly.
That's right.
And there were 4 rounds in that championship, according to our records. You ran against John Bowe, Larry Perkins, Andrew Medicki, Charlie O'Brien, Bruce Allison, and that was a pretty fiery affair, wasn't it?
Yeah, the National Panasonic Series, we call it, and it was instituted by Peter Williamson, who got behind. He bought a Galloway Mark II with a Ford BDA in it and everything, and he wanted to race it, and so he said, "We're not going to go racing against other categories. We want to have a Formula Pacific series," and he put that on. National Panasonic did it. And it was probably the most serious racing in Australia that I'd had done. Very similar to racing in New Zealand, where it was kill or be killed with a lot of us, and we were all great mates off the track. But gee whiz, on the track it was pretty serious going, and I enjoyed it massively. And I think Bruce Allison won that series. Just by keeping his nose clean. He stayed out of all the aggro that was going on at the front. And I remember one race at Calder, we were there, and Larry, Andrew and John Bowe all together, and just going through the S's at Calder, and John Bowe was driven up over the top of Andrew Medicki, bounced off Larry, went on the infield and ran over a photographer and broke his leg. I think it was Dale
Rogers, that's right, yeah.
And I was just behind all that action. I just drove past waving to them all and won the race. I thought, and they tried to stop John Bowe because they black flagged him and he didn't stop and everything because he kept going. And he said, "What was I going to do? I'm not an ambulance." He said, "I'm not going to pick him up." So he got rubbed out of the event.
yes. The photographers of that era were not best pleased with Mr. Bowe over that incident, but they've made up since.
Yeah, he's a good bloke and a hard competitor, and I enjoyed racing against him. I think even when we did that, he was in a Formula 5000 when we did that Rose City 10,000. And that year was...
That was at Winton?
Winton.
Yes.
And that was the Formula Atlantic Pacific cars versus the Formula 5000.
The leftover 5000s.
Yeah, and there was Alfie and John Bowe. They were the main competitors. Graham McRae was there, and there was a fair bit of aggro in the pits because they didn't like all these new guys coming along. It was all right from earlier in the year when they had the advantage of racetracks where they just blew us away in a straight line. Like there's 300 horsepower difference between the cars. So we got to places like Sandown and even over Perth at Wanneroo and Oran Park and things like that where I had no chance. But at Winton, all of a sudden, things changed. And a lot of the Formula 5000 blokes didn't like it. And I remember an altercation in the pits between myself and Graham McRae, and he's poking his finger at me and telling me what I should and shouldn't be doing and everything, and I finally turned around and said to him, "Listen, I reckon you're too old anyway and you should give it away." And
Cassius would not have liked that.
And that was like a red rag to a bull anyway. In the race, Alfie and John Bowe and myself went at it, and John Bowe actually, he was in the lead and spun out of the lead, and Alfie and I went at it, and it was 100 Ks, and 100 Ks around Winton is a bloody long way. And I think at the end of the day, I was just on his gearbox going across the line. But every time we got to the straights, it was see you later, you know. And I'd catch up to him round the back and through all the tight bits, there was no problem.
So when you sort of go to the next stage, I guess, with Formula Pacific, that was when Bob Jane, in 1980, he ran the Australian Grand Prix at Calder with a mixed field of Formula 5000s and a couple of Formula 1 cars, Alan Jones and the Irish racing driver, Jack O'Malley.
Yeah, and so he brought an Alpha out with him.
Yes, Formula 1 Alpha, and of course Alan was in the Williams, and they just blew everybody else away, including the Formula 5000s.
Yeah.
But the following year, and for the next 3 years, I think it was 3 years or 4 years, Bob ran the Australian Grand Prix for Formula Pacific.
That's right.
And you were well and truly in that many times.
Yes.
And you raced against the best there was at the time, didn't you?
Oh yeah. Well, there was 2 world champions, 3 world champions. I could count Alan Jones, Nelson Piquet, Alain Prost. They all came out.
Jacques Lafitte,
Niki Lauda. This is over a period of time that all came out here to race it. Plus Roberto Marino when he wanted to do that. And budding Formula 3 guys that want to get on. There was Alan Berg, I think, a couple of Americans. Jose Legarza was doing Indianapolis. And so the fields were really good and hard.
And it was because I think Alan Hamilton had the Tiga, and virtually the entire rest of the field were RT4s.
There was
racing cars.
There was a couple of marches and stuff, but nothing at the pointy end. The pointy end was Alfie and the Tiga, and the rest of them were all Ralts.
And those couple of years. I mean, it's kind of like in today's world, it'd be like bringing somebody like Lewis Hamilton and Verstappen out to run against Van Gisbergen and the rest of the supercar guys in the same cars.
That's right.
You know, it was most unusual. I think it was possibly one of the only times anywhere in the world that such a combination where you had it was really a rebirth of the old Tasman series.
Yeah.
Where the Formula 1 guys came out to run against the locals.
That's exactly right.
And that must have been a hell of a lot of fun.
I enjoyed it immensely, and I think with me, the experience of racing in New Zealand, the International Series, doing that for 3 years, which I did in January and February each year for 1981, 82 and 83, gave me a good grounding of what to expect.
Yeah.
And I look now at that racing. It was just really enjoyable, but we were deadly serious. And the best thing about those cars in the day, when you're sitting on the grid alongside the likes of those world champions, my equipment was the same as their equipment.
Yeah.
And you couldn't get out moneyed for whatever it is. You can have as many tyres out there sitting, but you're only on 4. And they were, after the first year, which was unlimited tyre rule, it was single tyre formula for 82 and 83. 81 was open tyre, and they all bought their qualifying tyres and bits. So we were nowhere in qualifying, but later on it was a different proposition.
Because I think it was 81 that Roberto Moreno came out for the first time, and Pee Wee Siddle brought him out.
That's right.
And they turned up with a plain yellow RT4 on the track.
Yeah.
And nobody had ever heard of this kid.
Yeah.
Right? And he puts it on pole against everybody.
Yeah.
Right. And it was very much a case of, who the devil is this fella?
Yeah.
And he was blisteringly fast.
Yeah.
And again, against guys like Alan Jones and the rest of the Formula 1 fellas, he was a star in the making, but he never quite made it in the Formula 1 world.
No, he was a really good friend of Nelson Piquet's. And he
both Brazilians?
Yeah, that's right. And he was fresh out of Formula Ford in the UK. Pee-wee bought him out here when he bought Piquet as well. So they've arrived and everything with, again, a whole pile of tricky Goodyear qualifying tyres. He had a set, PK had a set, Jones had a set, and I'm not too sure whether anybody else got them. I know that Larry had a go at it. He got a set of PK's ones after he'd finished, but that was a big thing just for those guys to get up the grid. In the race, he deserved the win. He won. He won that year. Then he won in '83 with me against me. He beat me at the end of the race, and I think he came out again. He won 3 times. I think.
Yeah, I think it was 81, 83 and 84.
Yeah,
I think it was.
As far as I can see. Yeah.
So then let's switch over to the period of time where you drove sports cars.
Yeah.
And sports cars at that time were, they weren't as popular as they were, for instance, in the 60s when you had Maddich and Stillwell and those guys running the bigger cars, right? But then you ran mostly against Pete Hopwood in the Kaditcha.
Yeah.
No, not the Kaditcha.
Yeah, it was a Kaditcha.
It was, the open wheel car, the open car.
Yeah.
As against the Batman Romano
That's right.
closed car.
Yeah, it was more like a single-seater with mudguards.
Yeah, exactly. Now you drove that. You drove a car for Richard Warland, who Richard had previously driven himself, which was a Mazda rotary engine car, which was most unusual. But tell us about that one spectacular day at Winton where things didn't go according to the script. Anybody's script.
The story behind it was that Richard wanted to sell the car, and he said he needed it to be successful to sell it. But I branded it a widowmaker because I drove it initially at Oran Park and Hoppy was the main opposition. The car itself, the Tiga, started life as a Sports 2000 car, and they would have had that 2-litre Ford engine, probably 125 horsepower, something like that. When you're sticking nearly 300 in the back of it, the car didn't really like it, and all the drive shafts and CV joints and all that stuff that comes with it complained bitterly. So I ran at Oran Park with it, and it spat a wheel off. I think I was actually leading Hoppy, and it spat a wheel off and nearly killed a bunch of guys in the fire truck down the road as the wheel whistled down there. And so that was at Oran Park. And then the next one was at Winton. And the rest is history. We qualified all right. I was on the front of the grid, and Hoppy, if you get in front with a V8 off the line, you can't pass them. I discovered that with the Formula 5000. So Hoppy was at the same thing. I was there, I was with him, and then going through the S's, coming onto the pit straight, I just, the throttle pedal stuck right to the floor and jammed wide open in third gear. And the first reaction is you jump on the brakes. Oh, that's what I did anyway. And with 300 horsepower drive in the back and a pair of front tyres locked solid, saying, no, we don't want to do this, the car went straight off the road, up the bank, hit a tyre wall, and went over, I don't know how many times, I gave up counting it.
Sky ground.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it. And it finally came to a halt, flat on what was left of the chassis. I think most of the wheels were gone off it. And with the engine doing about 14,000 revs still till it finally died. And my wife was alongside to Richard Warland at the time, and I remember she said to me, Warland's looking at it saying, there goes my car and all my investment. And my wife at the time said, there goes my husband, and that was it.
It's a matter of priorities, isn't it?
It was, yeah. Anyway, I walked away from it with a small scratch on my cheek, and that was about it. And poor old Richard, they shoveled his car in the back of a trailer and he took it home, yeah.
And then I think he ended up in Hong Kong as a trader in wine.
Yeah.
Some years later.
Yeah.
He used to turn up at my place with boxes of wine.
Yeah.
He referred to them as samples.
Yeah. He worked for Wolf Glass.
That's right.
Yeah. Nice guy, just a lovely bloke. Yeah.
Okay, so that kind of runs out the end of your major period of racing in open wheelers and sports cars.
Yeah.
Then you moved on to touring cars, which is what Muscle Car Magazine is all about.
Yeah.
And you got there at the high point, the mid-70s of Tirana versus Falcon in the big class.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So where did that start for you? Who was the one who tapped you on the shoulder and said, "Come race with me"?
Gracie. Oh no, actually, I'll take it back. Before that, I did one race, Bruce Richardson. It was preparing a Falcon for Ron Dixon, the Thompson Ford Falcon. And it was a XC hardtop thing, which they all ran back in those days. And it was like the CRC 300 or something.
At Amaroo?
No, Oran Park. Must have been the Scholastic 300. It was at Oran Park. And I turned up with that, with no idea, any perception about what touring cars were like at all. And I got in the car and sat in the seat and I couldn't even see over the damn dashboard. Anyway, so I had to modify a few things and built me up, and then I found the car just so cumbersome and slow and wallowing around and things like that. But oddly enough, I qualified it all right. And Ron was with us, and he seemed to be pretty good with everything. Bruce Richardson was pretty happy. But in the race, it had some disease and it spat spark plugs out of the head for, I don't know whatever happened with it, but we didn't finish. And that was the start of sort of the touring car thing. And they rang me up at the end of that year about going to Bathurst. And I spoke to David Mackay about it at the time, and he said, if you're going to go and race at Bathurst, you've got to get something that's known, a reliable proposition with a good team and everything like that. He said, if you go there and you become a whipping boy, no one will take any notice of you. So I took his word, and when I knocked him back, poor old Bruce Richardson was pretty shattered about it. He's a terrific bloke and he's a great engineer, but it was just... the car wasn't right for me and I wasn't happy. So I sat that Bathurst out, and the next year, which was in 79, Gracie rang me and said, okay, come and have a look at this car. It's run as a second car for us. He says, it's my old four-door A9X. Ralph Radburn owns the car, but we're preparing it and running it. And he said, it's a good car. I said, that sounds more like me, so I went along. And Gracie took me, because he was based out at Amaroo Park then, so we had a car, we had the car and his car. We ran around Amaroo regularly until, I sort of got to grips with the whole thing. And then we went to Bathurst with it, and it was I had a great week. And Ralph Radburn was a great guy, terrific. Les Small ran the car with Gracie and Frank Gardner, and that they were all there. And I was this young, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed young kid amongst them all, and it was one of the better weeks I've ever had at racing up at Bathurst. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? The A9X, the tail end of the 70s, that was when both Holden and Ford were building really solid, very, very fast motor cars.
Yeah.
But of course, the A9X was one of the oddball motor cars because you had drum brakes on the rear, which was a sort of an odd hangover from previous decades.
Yeah.
But moving on from that was probably where you started.
It was, yeah. As it turned out, that was the year that Brock won by
6 laps.
6 laps.
Exactly.
Yeah. Broke the lap record, last lap and everything. Larry Perkins and Jansen was second and we were third.
Yeah.
I remember Frank Gardner saying to me, "Listen, boy," he said, "you're not going to get out there, you're not going to win it." He says, "Forget about any of that. But if you go round and round and round all day, keeping in a good place and keeping your nose clean, you'll end up in the money." And sure as hell, he was so right. Yeah. I ended up as Rookie of the Year, and Ralph got plenty of prize money and slaps on the back, and it was the best he'd ever done, and he loved it. And we had a great time.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Frank, long gone, and much revered Frank Gardner.
Yeah.
He was one of the more straightforward fellas in the game, and if he liked you, he did, and if he didn't. Yeah. That was the end of that road.
Yeah. Well, I'm not too sure at the end of the next year whether he liked me or not after that.
Okay, tell us about that. What happened next year?
Well, because I did so well in Ralph's car, then he and Gricey got together and asked me to drive with Gricey in the Commodore for the next year. And
1980.
1980.
First year of the Commodores.
That's right. He had a VB Commodore, and it was one of the first. And we actually were very competitive. Typical Gricey. He was a very quick driver, and it was a good show. And we went all right, and we're going good. And then I got in the car, and I actually hit the front. I remember passing John Harvey going up Mountain Straight. I gave him the bird as I went past, then kept going. Anyway, led the race. I'm not too sure how many laps, but it did. And they said, "Okay, you got so many laps. You're in the car." Then Gricey gets in it, and I remember I had about 10 laps to go, and I really sprinted hard in the car to finish up. And typical of a person that wasn't really au fait with driving touring cars in long distance, I was dressed up looking like Nelson Piquet with the balaclava and the U-boot driving suit and the big long underwear and all the rest of the stuff. And it was like a 40-degree day, and never heard of having a drink in the car, none of that. So I dehydrated to the max. And when I came into pit, and they said, "Listen, Gricey's got a migraine or a headache or something, and you're going to have to do another 20 laps.
Ooh, ouch.
And I said, "Yeah, okay, how do I go?" And I lasted about probably another 10, I suppose, and then ran out of talent at the end of the straight. I just couldn't push the brake pedal. And that's the days when Conrod didn't have the chase, it was straight. And so I stuck it in the sand at the end of the straight and threw the lead away. And I remember coming in, they dug the car out and dragged it in, and we lost all the lead and everything. And poor old Frankie, he just said to me, over the radio, he said, "Don't do that to me, son." And too late, it was all over. And so they ended up throwing me in a cold shower and got me around and hydrated again and all the rest of the stuff. And Gricey did a bit. Then at the end of the race, I did the last 15 laps or 20 laps. But the race was gone then. Yeah,
well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because that was, if you would, even though it's not that long ago, 1980, it was early days in understanding the physical necessities of being a human being in a racing car with the internal temperature is 50 degrees plus.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we don't think of it now as a problem.
Yeah.
But then it was, as you said, you didn't have a drink machine in the car.
No, never thought of it.
You'd never thought of it. So, it's, I mean, the mere fact that you did what you did a full stint and then a stint and a half on the run.
Yeah.
I mean, you must have been pretty good.
Yeah, and the car itself too, they're not like the modern stuff. No power steering, heavy steering in the car, was like manual steering. No such thing as a cool suit, which they all carry, right? And then also the brakes on the car, they had pad knockoff, so going down the straight, you had to move your foot. It was like a square dance corner, just bringing the pads back up to the discs, and just things like that you didn't take. You didn't know, and I didn't know anything about. So it was all a new dimension for me.
Unfortunately, I guess it was also a situation where the team manager, for argument's sake, and Frank probably didn't think to coach you. He just assumed that you knew.
Yeah. That's right.
And that wouldn't happen today.
Yeah.
You know, but in those days, you were a professional racing driver. You know what you're doing.
Yeah. In those days too, I've got to say about Gricey, he was really, really good to me. I got on well with Alan Grice right through the thing, and I classified him as a friend, and he went out of his way to look after me.
Alan's a very black and white individual.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
No, not at all.
So the next year, 81, you went down a class.
Yeah.
You went down into the Toyotas, into the with Williamson.
Peter Williamson, yeah.
Of course, Peter Williamson is famous for the first man ever to have a camera in a car.
Yeah, he's a car salesman. We both were, and Willow could talk underwater with a mouthful of marbles, and he was good fun. A great team, and I'm still really, really good mates with all of his guys that were with him that worked for him, and I was good friends with Mike Quinn, who is
the PR man at Toyota.
No. He was Willow's brother-in-law. I raced against him in Formula Ford and stuff, and I happened to pinch his pit crew when he went over to the UK to race over there. While he was gone, I pinched all his pit crew, and they're still mates to this day. And they were helping out with Willow as well, and it was just a good team. And he drove the car so hard. How it survived, I'll never know, but it did. It said testament to the preparation and it being a Toyota, I suppose.
The pair of you just rang its neck all day, isn't it? It was screaming its head off in every gear. At all times. And
I remember every time I'd get in the car, the red line was about $7,000 or something, but every time I got in it after Willow's had it, the tacho was hanging around 8.5, it was unbelievable.
Oh, dear me. So that I guess that led you on to that whole period of driving Toyotas in the long-distance races.
Yeah.
That was that more comfortable in the sense of more comfortable. The cars were lighter, closer to an open wheeler in the weight balance.
Yeah, I didn't look upon it like that. I looked upon it in other ways. Yes, they're more nimble. They did things, and they're much lighter car to drive and a lot easier to drive in that area. But you're still fighting against. Other cars are very similar, so your adrenaline level's still up exactly the same, and it was, and strategically, from my point of view as a Toyota dealer, it was logic that I drove for the factory and stuff, and it was good, and I think 84 was the first year that we drove at Bathurst when there was a mixture of Group C, Group A. Group A was coming in, and so they mixed the categories up. So we drove the Corolla in Group A, and that was the first Toyota Corolla to come to Australia as a Group A car, built by TRD in Japan.
Because Toyota ran against Nissan back in the early 60s very consistently, and guys like Bob Morris drove for the Toyota team, right?
Yes.
Against the Nissans or the Datsuns in those days.
Yeah.
So you had a lot of competition in the small car class.
Yes.
And as things moved on into the 80s, the competition was still very, very strong, but just wasn't as broad based as it had been previously.
No, and I think the Group A sort of started to bring that along really well, and. We ran the Corolla in that first race, Stephen Brooke and myself, and unfortunately, the Japanese underestimated the size of Bathurst and the circuit, and they homologated diff ratios that were way too short. I think it probably would have been, Oran Park type ratios, and of course we started at Bathurst. We get halfway down, the tacho's hanging off the end of the dial. It was round past 10 and starting to hit the stopper, and they said we retired the race with a oil pump failure, but the oil pump did fail.
Along with everything else?
Along when the Conrod took it out. and Bob Holden had another car in same thing in the race, and he puddled around and just won it through attrition.
Consistency,
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So the 87 race, that was the World Championship race.
Yeah.
First and only ever World Championship. Thank you very much to Mr. Bernie Eccleston.
Yeah.
But that was a race of, let's call it, he who cheats best and doesn't get caught.
Yes. Yeah. And that was on between, Walkinshaws when they were out here and the Sierras of
Eggenberger. Yeah, the Johnson cars.
Yeah, that's right.
There's so many stories about that year, that race meeting. Swapping wheels and tyres from different teams on the same car that wouldn't fit out of the front guard. Sorts. Really interesting things. But, I mean, you had a pretty good race until it rained.
Yeah, well, just getting back to the illegal parts again, the world champions, Chris Hodgetts, I think it's Hoggets they call him. I think they bought a Corolla out here, and he raced with New Zealand Andrew Bagnall. And I remember we strolled up to scrutineering and had a look under the bonnet of that car, and it was a sports sedan. The engine was moved back and round, and it's all sorts of things that happened to it. And this is at scrutineering, and the thing, it was nothing like that. We looked like road cars, ours were absolute road cars compared to it. And so I said to Bondi originally, I said, can you do me a favour? And I said, I want to fix these blokes up in practice. I said, can you just give us a bit of a tow around? And Bondi was running his Alfa. He said, no problem. So for 2 laps in qualifying, maybe 3, he towed me up Mountain Straight, then moved over. When he sort of get up the hill, I get around the top, flat out across the top of everything, and he'd sit behind me, and then we'd come on to Conrod. He'd just jump in front and
tow you down the straight,
flat out down the straight. And I remember I used to use about 8.3, 8.4 down the straight. That's what it used to pull, and I had 9.2 on board with Bondi, and we out-qualified the sports sedan Corolla by about 2 seconds.
only 2 seconds.
It shot him to bits. So they were absolutely. I remember talking to Andrew Bagnall about it, and because he bought the Calder Raceway in New Zealand, that's what was out here. And he said, I can't believe you guys went that fast. I said, oh, yeah, that's normal for us, They just didn't have a clue what went on.
So what happened with the car? Who drove it off the racetrack?
It poured rain, absolutely hammered down. And at that stage, I think they had gone out. They either crashed or blew up or did something. So the sports sedan didn't finish. The next race, next car to us, both our cars, I think there was a few laps difference, was 17 laps back to Bob Holden.
Oh, crikey. Only 17.
Yeah, it was just ridiculous. And we could see it pouring rain as at the top of the mountain. And it just came in so fast. It was even hail. And I said to Tony Niovani, the manager at the time, just get him in pit and we can sit here and wait until it stops. They're not going to catch that. Didn't get a chance.
Yeah. On slicks?
On slicks,
yep.
Hail, rain and everything. Drew went off, and then I think it was Mike Quinn was in the other car, and he ran into the back of him, and then a BMW ran into them, and it was all carnage at the top. Yeah.
Yeah, I can remember that afternoon in pit lane. There was so much water in pit lane that it was up past your ankles.
Oh.
It was ludicrous. It was it was just rain like you'd never seen it before.
Yeah.
I have a vivid memory of Neil Crompton standing in pit lane in his red coat, the Channel 7 red coat, with an umbrella, and the rain was horizontal. It really was. It was unbelievable. So look, you move on. You change teams.
Yeah.
You got a phone call from Dick Johnson.
Yeah.
So tell us all about the fact that you are one of the only two drivers, I think from memory, there's only two drivers who've competed at Bathurst in a three-car team, a three-driver team.
Three drivers, yeah.
Because it was Brock won the race in '83, with same car but three drivers.
Yeah, swap cars.
Yeah, and you came second with Dick and John.
Yeah.
In a car that you started.
Yeah, he started three cars, Dick did. But again, as you went back before, this was in '88. '87 was World War III in the pits. And left over, they had a vendetta against Dick Johnson, they particularly Walkinshaw. So he protested all three cars. And it was just a bun fight the whole time. And they pulled everything apart. And this is overnight. It must have been on the Saturday night before the race on the Sunday. They were still screwing them back together at daybreak after the protest went. And our car was a part of the gig as well. Dick had, of course, he'd sold the car we were driving to a guy called Mike Gravitt or something from the UK, and he bought it. And that was, so he flew out to drive, and he was teamed up with John Bowe in the second car. Alfie Costanzo and I were in the third car, and Dick and Croaky Crichton, or was down the other way, were in
the lead car.
Yeah, whatever it was. And Dick intended, obviously, to swap around as they went during the day. And so he and John Bowe ended up in the lead car, whatever it was going to be.
Back in the days when you could actually, when one driver could drive more than one car during the race.
Cross-centre. Yeah. And as the race turned out, Dick's car threw a flywheel off or something, I think, going down Conrod Straight. So he went out with his car.
That must have been noisy.
It would have been a lot of fun. I'd going backwards at 280 k's or something. Anyway, he went out. John Bowe went out. I think a motor thing, so he was out. And of course, I'm the only one running. And there's always this standard joke between a lot of us when they hang the board out for me saying, Dick's out, and then come around the next time and it said, JB's out, and then the next board came in and says, you're out. So that was about, I'm guessing here, about the 30th lap. Alfie and I started 11th, and I think I was running 4th when we got up there. So we're running at the pointy end of the field. Alfie didn't even put his suit on. No, he didn't even make the grade, nor did Cravitt, and nor did Neville Crichton. But it was a funny thing. When I've driven into the pits to have the driver change, there's all these guys sitting with driving suits and helmets on, looking at each other saying, who's going to get in this thing? It was so funny. Anyway.
You would have had 5 other drivers.
Everybody standing around.
Wanting a turn.
Yeah, just wanting to have a go. And where we got the only hotel in town. Anyway, they got in the car and took it over, and we finished second behind Tony and Thomas Mazzera. The disappointment again kept going because at a pit stop you had to turn them off for the World Championship rounds. So when they've pitted, Dick's turned it off, John's got in the car, click, 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 no starter motor, failed. So they had to rush off, get another starter motor, rush back down, put it on the car and got going. Lost about 3 or 4 minutes doing all this sort of stuff, and missed out by 28 seconds from Tony at the finish. It's woulda, coulda, shoulda, and there's plenty of those stories, but I felt just a bit disappointed because at those days, John Goss was always going around saying, I'm the only driver that's won Bathurst and won the Australian Grand Prix. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I'm running a close second here. I'm the only driver that won Bathurst and came second in the Australian Grand Prix. So, but as it's turned out, I'm the first of the losers in both those cases.
Yes, well, first of the losers. That's okay. That was the Penske line. Second place is the first loser.
It is.
That's right.
Yeah,
exactly.
And it is. No one remembers who comes second.
No, exactly. Yeah. Tell me, around about '89, being a Toyota dealer, you decided that there was a Supra coming out of Japan, which was worth a go. Now, where did that all start? I know you still own the car. The car is now a historic racing car as against a brand new one.
Yeah.
So tell us that story.
It's an interesting story too. We could be here for the next couple of hours, but I'll try and make it brief. I agitated Tony Nirvani to try and do something about it. I said, I'm sick of running around a Corolla looking in the mirrors for all the quick cars to come past. I said, Tony, I'm over it. And that's when I went to Dick. And the next year, so he said they kept on going till they come across the Supras, which were competing in the Japan All Touring Car Championship, and very competitive. So I went, can we get something like that out here? So we agitate till finally they did. They ordered the car from Japan. From memory, it was about $500,000 to buy this car, ex-Tom's race car from Japan, and this was, I think they started doing it in '88, and in '89 the car came out. Again, I'm getting a long story, but I'll try and make it quick. The car arrives from Japan, and it's like something that had been dragged through a paddock, and
well used,
well used, and not a nice car. And the management at Toyota at the time, Bob Miller, who was the director of sales and marketing, I think he was in charge of it all. And we all know that Bob had a bit of a fiery temper at any stage. So when looks like they've had their old used car trick played on them, he lost the plot, and he's on to Japan, and he said, you're going to send out another car, a brand new one, and we're going to send this back to you. As things turned out, the car came out on a carnet, which is a duty thing that you don't pay the duty, it's got to go out of the country in a year. So he said, we'll send the car back, but you're only going to get the chassis and everything back. You send out a brand new rolling chassis, but and we'll pay the duty on that, bring it in as spare parts, which is what they did. So when it's arrived, they've taken all the bits off that were worthwhile off the first car, put them on the cab chassis for the second car, built that up. He then took the car that was the cab chassis, took that up to Sydney up here, took it down to Simsey's and made a coffee table out of it, and then sent it back to the Japanese.
Well, you save freight on the way back.
Oh, you certainly did,
because you pay freight on either the weight or the volume.
Yeah,
so the volume was extremely small by comparison.
Yeah. So So that was Bob Miller, and to this day, I hate to think of the phone calls, but the Japanese lost a massive amount of face on it, and if you know what they're like that, lose face, so it's not good. And anyway, following on that, because then the car arrives, we go to Bathurst with it, and because it had been put together from the bits of the other car and everything, we went in the race and the front suspension failed on it. I think either it was a shock mount or something pulled out, and we didn't finish.
Well, you sort of think about, as you said a moment ago, shoulda, woulda, coulda kind of exercise. There are so many stories of that nature.
Yeah.
You did one Bathurst with Bondi in his Sierra.
Yes.
Colin, always a very good organiser, always a very good preparer.
Yeah.
Was that what I expected to be a really pleasant experience?
With Bondi, it's always good. He's the ultimate optimist.
Yeah.
And we went through, I'm trying to think how many motors up there that week. It was a brand new car, terrific, beautifully made, typical, and we were looking good. And, we went up there and it lost an engine, oil pressure, second engine, oil pressure, and third engine, we only did a handful of laps. It was forever. I think they held the engine in with Velcro at the end of it all, just it was getting changed that much. Till finally they discovered that the dipstick that was in there was the wrong dipstick, and it was giving a false reading on the oil in the car.
Oh, good Lord.
And it was that simple. And that's what cost us the race, even the entry and the whole lot. So, which was a shame.
It's funny, isn't it? Dick Johnson used to say when he arrived at Bathurst on the Tuesday, back in the old days in the 80s, his standard expression was, "I wonder what 10-second part we're going to break this year that we've never broken before."
Yeah, and it was like that, yeah. And I know he was incredibly disappointed, but to me he didn't show much. I like Bondi because the guys he had with him were good, and he had a pretty good attitude for the whole lot, because I think he's been there and done it plenty of times with all the different stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you move on. Let's jump over a few things and go to, I guess, the last, possibly the most disappointing championship of your career.
Yeah.
The 2-litre championship you were with Colin in the Toyota Seekers.
Yeah.
Against a couple of BMW M3s.
Yes.
Or three series cars, not M3s. Very tight championship. Came down to the wire at the last event.
Yeah.
And it sort of, it was one of those stumbled over, things just went completely wrong for you. Possibly one of the most memorable, mistake-ridden end of races that I can remember.
Yeah, half a lap to go.
Exactly.
I was in the lead. On the last lap, one of the BMWs pitted and then came out. He was 2 laps or a lap down or whatever it was. Came out in front of me. Peter Dillman, who was the main opposition to me.
From the same team?
Yeah, from the same team, was... I think I just about saw him off. It was a close race for most of the time, and he's a really good steerer, and the cars were good. They got a lot of stuff off Frank Gardner, I think, gearboxes and bits and pieces, and the cars were very competitive. And I was in the lead with the little. There was a 2-litre engine Seeker, and last lap I caught up to him, John Cotter, who was the second car. And we arrived down at the end of the straight, and I expected him to move over and let me pass, but he didn't. He ran me under brakes, and I sort of said, "Oh, well, that'll do." And then under the bridge, same thing, to the next one, under brakes. And from there on, I'm not sure what happened. Whether something happened to the car, I don't know, but all I know is I ended up in the
weeds.
In the wall down at the bottom of the go-kart track, and just with a busted car and half a lap to go, and the championship, all in balance. So Peter Dillman went through and won the race, and good for him. I still don't know what happened, and I'm not going to go,
It's past.
Things.
It's history.
It's history. I've moved on from it. There was one championship that I lost that I should have won, along with the Formula 2 championship in 1980, where I tried to pass John Bowe around the outside at Sandown, and I didn't have to. The red mist came down over me that day, and all I'd do was run around behind John Bowe, and I would have won the Formula 2 championship. But instead I backed it into the wall down at Dandenong Road and watched Richard Davidson go past and win it. So yeah, they say it's character building. That's it.
Yes,
but that one was definitely my fault. I know that one.
What, over a very wide-ranging career, what was your favourite car that you raced?
Oh, the RT1 Ralt by...
The RT1, not the RT4?
No, the RT1. They could talk to you. We played around with and changed things and made it better and better. When I raced it in New Zealand, which was I suppose the benchmark for everything, and I won some races at the International Series in New Zealand and everything, but I managed to always bring it back damaged. That was just the way it was. And the last chassis we did with it, Harry Galloway did it, and he's a bit like Paul Liston when they build chassis, and when you do it a custom, it's not a production thing. It's just a better chassis. And I moved forward, and just with the I suppose input that I had on the car, which I could see was wrong in the traditional cars, because Ron had to build them for people that were 6 foot tall and
5'3".
Yeah, and I was in the middle, and I could go further forward in the car, which helped because the car had a turn-in problem and understeer. So if I moved forward, and I went forward 13 inches, which is what, a foot, a bit, yeah. And
Move weight forward.
All the weight went forward. We then took the formal side pods off the side and put a tank behind the seat. We had a tank up the side of the car. It went behind me. And Harry did all this stuff, and
it worked.
Oh, it transformed the car. It was, and from there on, that was when I drove it in 81, 80, and all right through the 81 season. And we were competitive at the National Panasonic Series with the RT4s, and that I'm not saying it was going to stay there. It was as fully developed, but it was a jet of a car. It was fantastic.
Of all the drivers you've driven against, who was the toughest? Don't tell me Graham McRae.
he was bigger.
Oh, he's a big man.
Yeah,
he's a big boy.
I can't pick out any one. The ones that I pick out are the guys that I raced against in Formula Pacific when it was full on. Yeah. All the Aussie guys, Alfie, Andrew Medici, John Bowe, Charlie O'Brien, Bruce Allison, all those guys. In New Zealand, Macmillan, Millen, Brett Riley, David Oxton, those guys, and then the internationals. The Formula One international guys, and they were over in New Zealand. Andrea de Cesaris, crazy bastard.
Oh, a guy with two eyes that pointed in opposite directions.
Yes, he had big blinks. Yeah. And I at Wigram, and I was on the front row of the grid, and it snapped an axle on the line, and De Cesaris was about 6 or 8 rows back, and he must have been in the middle of one of his big blinks he had, and he was flat in third gear when he hit the back of me. And I just saw him just disappearing down the road in the air. It was just the best long jump I've ever seen. And that put me out, put me out for the next race as well. Yeah.
Gosh. Yeah. So you've had your fair share of let's call them accidents.
Incidents.
You, as you said, you've got a scratch at Winton on your cheek.
Yes.
And that, you've never hurt yourself on a racetrack, and you hurt yourself on the road.
Yep. Yeah, that was 10 years ago last September. I was riding a motorbike in the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee, and I just pulled out from a siding where I was taking photos up in the mountains and rode on the wrong side of the road and had a head-on with another bike going the other way, and he zigged, I zagged, and we chased each other off the road till I hit a tree, and the rest is
history.
History, yeah. I'm a paraplegic now, T12, and it hasn't been easy, but thanks to my wife Eileen and a lot of good friends, I get through.
You're doing really good, and I mean, look, I've talked to an awful lot of racing drivers over the years, and you've had a stellar career. You were fun all the way through it.
Yeah.
Everybody liked you. Everybody still likes you. You're one of those people who makes up the good, the good guy team. And, today has been a real pleasure talking to you. I really thank you for coming in. I thank Eileen for helping you come in. And, you'll be, hopefully you'll be with us for a very long time, enjoying life and looking back on it and having fun doing that too.
Thanks, mate. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Well, friends, that's the conclusion of another episode of the Australian Muscle Car Magazine podcast series. We hope you enjoyed the tales contained herein and look forward to seeing you again soon. In the meantime, be sure to check out musclecarmag.com.au for news stories, news and galleries from the Muscle Car Vault. We add them weekly, as well as brand new digital issues as soon as they become available on the newsstand. Thanks for listening, and as always, safe driving and happy reading from the team at Australian Muscle Car Magazine.